Thank you for joining Wars of the Roses. As we begin with Part 1, Are Other Planets Inhabited? By Manly P. Hall. An article taken from PRS Journal, Volume 18, Number 3, Winter 1958. Are Other Planets Inhabited? By Manly P. Hall. From time immemorial, man has assumed that he is surrounded by life he cannot see. He is quite willing to assume that space is only a name he gives to something which may be filled with growth, energies, forms, and lives which are beyond his estimation. In the vision of Scipio, the Romans attempted to emphasize this point, and several other ancient and classical writers have also discussed the subject. We recall that Socrates said that with the eyes of his mind, his inner perception, he was able to realize that there were peoples living along the shores of the air, as men lived along the shores of the sea. We have no reason to doubt, therefore, that the shores of the air are inhabited. There may be bright cities and worlds, interpenetrating our own, separated from us by the great octaves or levels of vibratory intensities. Perhaps many of our ancient legends of gods and heroic beings, of creatures coming from other worlds to attend upon our needs or to variously affect our way of life, have to do with these other dimensions which seers, mystics, or some of the ancients, under their various hypnotic and narcotic drugs, were able to contemplate and perhaps even contact. It was also early believed, in contrast to our more relative modern knowledge, that the only possible way in which man could finally orient himself in this greater universe was through faculties that were latent within himself. That man could not escape from a level except by reaching into deeper levels of his own consciousness. He can explore the level of his sensory perceptions to his heart's content, and he may also gradually refine these sensory perceptions with their overtones and undertones. He cannot, however, break through into a completely different level of vibratory intensity or energy, except through his internal faculties and powers. It was anciently conceived that man possessed within himself the only instrument by which he could ultimately open the whole of the universe. This instrument was his own potential energy power, and this energy, conditioned into various forms of consciousness, had to be gradually unfolded and its resources clarified. Through discipline and the perfection of esoteric arts and sciences, the individual could make available the means of contacting other worlds than this. Today, we have a tendency to overlook this equation almost entirely. We are interested principally in extending within our own vibratory range into the other worlds. We are therefore thinking strongly of our solar exploration in terms of the mechanical devices, the methods, and the means which we are gradually developing within our own way of life. There have been a great many questions as to how planets might be inhabited, and the ancient Orientals have a very simple concept, which has been rather well sustained by stratosphere exploration in more recent times. This concept maintains that within the vast solar field of the Sun itself, which extends to the circumference of the solar system, there is a universal distribution or diffusion of seed life. According to this idea, the entire area which we call the body of the Sun, extending not only through the great field of the corona, but outwardly to envelop and enclose the total solar system, this immense field is filled with germinal life. This space we live in is like an incredible Earth, and this physical space dimension is full of seeds called spores, which exist and can survive in free space, without atmosphere as we know it. Space, without anything that we can perceive, can still contain and sustain these spores. They remain in a seed state until they are drawn within some sphere of creation in which their various potentials can be unfolded. The ancients believed that all planets, in their original development and unfoldment, followed a similar pattern. As each planet reached a certain degree in its growth and solidification, or in the development of its own maturity as a planet, These free spores were attracted within the atmosphere of that planet and held there, gradually falling through the atmosphere into whatever substances the planet afforded. From these substances, the spores began to grow, to release, and to populate the planets with appropriate forms of life. Obviously, the forms of life would depend upon several things because forms are bound closely to the environmental circumstances in which they are involved. That forms are in large measure the product of time and place cannot be denied. It must also be assumed, then, that forms of some kind exist wherever there is time and place. In the intricate environment of a vast astrocosmogony, all the planets have their own climates and proximities to the Sun, as well as particular intervals between themselves and other planets, so that they mutually affect each other and are, in turn, probably affected by cosmic suns beyond our own. In the course of countless hundreds, thousands, billions of years, these planets, evolving in their own ways and according to their own patterns, produced infinite forms of life. When we consider that no one at this time can possibly tell us all the forms of life that exist on this earth, we can realize how much more diversified the vast fields of space may be. At this point, let us try to summarize briefly a little of the mechanics of the universe as we find them traditionally recorded in various writings, philosophical systems, and, to a measure, in certain scientific researches. All of these findings point in one direction, regardless of how we may view them. They point to the inevitability that we exist in a living universe, a universe which is full of potential life, and that therefore we cannot afford to assume that any part of this universe is not filled with life. We have no way of knowing, or even assuming, that this life is not like our own, moving through various patterns of evolution and progress. In all these researches, one point stands out clearly, namely, it is universally agreed that the Sun is the archetypal cause or root of the various life forms that exist everywhere in this solar system. Therefore, in some mysterious way, we come to the words of Scripture relating to deity. My tabernacle is in the Sun. Also, in the Sun must be the archetype, the grand scheme, the trestle board, the architect's design. All life within the solar system must come under the general law of the Sun, and it must furthermore come under the pattern which is established in the development, release, and specialization of solar energy. Other solar systems will have different centers from which this power, or this organizing principle, moves. In our solar system, however, the pattern of laws or rules by which the Sun sustains creation and energizes all life, as well as the geometrical formulas involved in this energization, must be stamped upon every planet. It is also stamped upon every electron, molecule, atom, and ion that may be involved in the entire diffusion of energies and substances which make up a world. This pattern, we have no reason to doubt, extends throughout the space of our solar system. Thus, wherever there are environments suitable for the development of life, forms are growing, rising up to meet the descending streams of souls, and finally producing rationally unsouled creatures. In a wonderful way, then, all of the children of planets are children of the same Father. They all share in the life of the Sun and are bound together in the solar system in one vast fraternity of brotherhood, whether they know it or not, whether they realize it or not, whether they practice it or not. This type of philosophical thinking was held until about the middle of the 18th century. Then we gradually began our drift toward materialism, until in the 19th century, particularly in the second half, the scientific attitude closed more and more tightly on this subject. A great many leaders of our intellectual life refused to admit that there could be other inhabited planets. The answer to their objection was the objection itself, namely that living things could live only in an atmosphere identical with ours. They assumed that because man exists in a certain atmosphere, he is a sum total of the possibilities of existence. While this might seem to be a narrow viewpoint, as late as the 20s of this century, it was the opinion of many prominent men in physics and astronomy that no other planet could be inhabited. The development of radio produced a marked change in this pattern of thinking. Man suddenly began to realize the reality of invisibles, and from this comparatively obvious symbolism, he began to understand that it was possible for things to cross intervals without wires, cables, or ropes to hold them together. The necessary bondage of physical ties was destroyed by this simple procedure of taking the telegraph off the wire and letting space and atmosphere serve for that wire. The moment this happened, man's thinking began to modify. He began to think in terms of extrasensory perception, telepathy, clairvoyance, and other things previously held only in groups of specialized thinkers and scholars. Gradually, out of all this, a new attitude toward our solar system emerged. Today, in our general thinking, we can divide the citizens of our solar system into two essential groups. The one group consists of beings who, to one degree or another, exist upon the same general level of vibration or energy gamut, which we call our own. Such beings, regardless of where they are, could be visible to us if they have bodies composed of similar basic substances or come within our sensory range. They could be communicated with and could have various interests or activities, attitudes or opinions in common. At the same time, because of isolation over great periods of time, they could have great cultural, intellectual, scientific, philosophical, and religious differences. The second group consists of those whom we have never been able to contact physically, and it is reasonable to doubt that we would ever establish such contact with them. They belong perhaps to the world of ghosts or spirits, or of mysterious beings existing in other gamuts of vibration. These, in their turn, could contact us in only one of two ways, either through internal apperceptive powers which we develop, or by some virtue through which they could change their own vibratory levels. Unless they were able to get within our planetary vibratory pattern on our level of sensory perception, we could not see them, nor could they consciously or objectively participate in any activity of ours. They would have to be wraiths and specters, and any contact that they had with us would be regarded as supernormal or abnormal in some way. That such may be the case, we know. We also realize that to these larger gamuts, our world may be only a tiny spot in space, and that we may be almost the outcasts from a great populated universe of beings superior to ourselves. On the other hand, we may be at the summit of a vast pattern extending below ourselves, through forms of life that we know nothing about. If you have in your backyard a square of ground which you have not planted, to which you have given no care, in time this square of ground, planted or unplanted, will grow over. Nature, in its own way, will bring the seeds and the life there. The birds will drop them, the wind will carry them, and by degrees this square of land will be filled, because nature does not permit emptiness. Nature abhors a vacuum, whether in material or superphysical things. Wherever there is space for life, life will begin, and life will always accommodate itself to the needs or requirements of the space or place where it is. We observe the tremendous differences appearing in the various zones of the Earth, the tropical, the temperate, the frigid. In these zones, life must make various adjustments, and these adjustments it makes. The differences in zones produce variations in flora and fauna, and also, to a large degree, supply different environments for the development of human life. In the same way, our planets may be regarded as great zones in which various forms of life may, and almost certainly do, exist. In fact, the day will undoubtedly come when an individual will be regarded as benighted, who denies that such is the case. We have no ground for assuming that nature would produce a vast solar system and then leave all of it untenanted except one small earth. Actually, all things are full of life, purpose, and activity. The next point to consider, then, is the orderly development of life. We know, or at least we are reasonably certain, that in the development of planets and in the formation of the solar system, all the planets were not formed at the same time. And we know from spectroscopic study that all planets are not identical in their chemical compounds. We may be reasonably certain, therefore, that no two planets can be alike. This must be so, not only because of their substances, but also because no two planets are in exactly the same relationship to the Sun. These planets, variously evolved at different times, present a problem that has stimulated esoteric consideration for a very long time. The ancients were of the opinion that those planets most remote from the Sun were the first conceived. They believed that the solar system, coming into formal existence, began at the circumference and moved toward the Sun, even as life, descending from the Sun, moved outward toward the circumference of the solar system. In the meeting of these two processes, the mystery of rational and conscious life, as we know it, was produced. There were then these two great streams of force, one moving from the circumference, rising up and released eternally through the formal principle, and the other descending as psychic energy or life, through one level or stratum to another, until finally it was able to enter into these forms, ensoul them, and bring them into conscious existence. Thus it is perfectly conceivable and proper to assume that our solar system consists of the rungs of a ladder, and that the planets represent the 7 powers or levels of development through which the soul, the logos, or the power of the Sun is released in its own great evolutionary purpose. Others of the ancients, as well as Paracelsus, like to assume that these planets were the vital organs of the solar body, that actually the solar system was a living organization, that the total solar system was ensouled by the Sun, and that each of the organs of the solar system as a planet served as a secondary center for the distribution of energy, for the purification of the body, for its regular function, maintenance, and normal activity. Thus the Sun has its 7 natures, or powers, through which its own growth is made possible. By this same concept, it was anciently assumed that actually it is the Sun that is evolving. It is the solar life growing up through all things, and not separate lives that we have to consider when we become heliocentric in our thinking. Ancient man, who was geocentric, placed all his faith upon the earth. The growing human being has gradually learned to place his confidence in the Sun, to raise his eyes to the stars, of which the Sun is one. Extending this thinking, it is possible that each of the 7 planets carries upon it a kind of life suitable for the evolution of one of the septenary parts or natures of the Supreme Being. Therefore, each of these 7 planets exemplifies one of the 7 laws of life. It exemplifies one of the 7 degrees of substance which make up the physical gamut of things. Thus we have a solar system that is like a musical scale, and all these notes ascending constitute within themselves a kind of octave, which is within our vision, our perception, and our possibility of hearing. We have every reason to assume that these tones are different, but that together they form the elements of a great melodic pattern, and ultimately, in their compound, a magnificent harmonic chord. We can then also reasonably assume that no planet and no nature is of itself bad. For why should the sovereign Sun, which Akhenaten worshipped as a being of great beauty, truth, wisdom, and love, and which is the absolute arbiter, the cause of all things, and the law governing all things, contain within itself that which is essentially bad? We cannot conceive of this great being, power, intellect, energy, or whatever we wish to call it, declaring war upon itself. We cannot believe in the existence of a zone of death in a structure totally alive. nor can we assume that it is the purpose or end of any form of life to be unlawful or evil. We must naturally assume, then, that these 7 planets essentially represent 7 qualities or conditions of good. Therefore, regardless of how the beings upon these planets react upon each other, or what they do in the various degrees of growth through which they pass, none of these planets has the power of absolute or complete destruction of anything, inasmuch as the actual or absolute destruction of anything could only be the sovereign power destroying itself. That these various planets may be incompatibly adjusted with themselves or each other is quite possible, for we see such incompatibility here upon our own Earth. We realize that groups of human beings with every essential need in common are still unable to cooperate voluntarily for the common good. Therefore, we have no way of estimating whether the beings of other planets are cooperative or competitive. To be continued. Thank you for watching, and please don't forget to share, like, subscribe, and comment. And if you can, please consider donating to Wars of the Roses. Links to PayPal and Patreon are in the description. Thank you so very much.